On the edge of a sprawling ranch surrounded by endless golden fields, a cry pierced the silence of dawn. It wasn't the sound of cattle, nor the heavy clatter of wagons. It was the desperate wail of an infant, helpless, trembling, unaware that her fate had already been bartered away. The townsfolk didn't know it yet, but behind the locked gates of that ranch, a deal darker than the desert night had just been made. A wealthy man, a billionaire whose name echoed through the county, had committed the unthinkable. He had sold his baby daughter to a stranger. Why? For power. For pride. For reasons that would shock everyone when the truth came out. But there was one witness he didn't account for. One set of eyes that had seen it all. Not human eyes, those could be bribed, blinded, or silenced. These eyes belonged to a majestic white horse. A creature of loyalty and unspoken truth. That horse would not stay silent. That horse would follow. And in the end, the truth would ride on its back. The town of Cold Creek was small, stitched together by dusty roads, wooden storefronts, and the quiet hum of simple lives. At the farthest edge stood the grand estate of Victor Harland, the billionaire ranch owner who seemed more legend than man. He had land that stretched farther than most could ride in a day. He had money that could silence whispers before they were spoken. And he had a reputation carved out of both fear and admiration. Behind those mansion walls, however, life was far from the peaceful image he displayed in town. Inside the nursery of that cold, echoing estate lay a baby girl, no more than 6 months old, wrapped in a thin quilt. Her name was Clara. She had wide eyes, pale like the winter sky, and a faint tuft of golden hair that glowed when morning light poured through the cracked shutters. To anyone else, she would have been a blessing. To Victor, she was nothing more than a burden. Victor had always wanted an heir, but not a daughter. His pride couldn't reconcile with the idea of a girl inheriting his empire. In the twisted chambers of his mind, Clara was a flaw in his legacy. A weakness. Only one creature seemed to truly care for Clara in that house, the white stallion that roamed the paddock just beyond her window. The horse, named Argent, was as striking as the dawn, tall, powerful, with a flowing mane that rippled like silver fire in the wind. Clara's crib faced the paddock, and whenever she cried, Argent would paw the ground restlessly, ears twitching, eyes locked on the window as if he understood. The servants often whispered about it. Strange, ain't it? That horse watches over the baby like he's her guardian. Maybe he is, another would mutter. But Victor paid no attention. He spent his days in meetings, his nights in whiskey-fueled silence, and his heart chasing deals that always seemed to grow darker. On a mild spring evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, Clara's soft laughter drifted through the open window. Argent lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and stepped closer to the fence. The baby's small hand pressed against the glass as if reaching for him. For a moment, the world softened. For a moment, there was purity in a place built on greed. That fleeting peace would not last. For even then, Victor Harland had already made his decision. A decision that would shatter every bond of love and morality. A decision that would soon turn the quiet hum of Cold Creek into a storm of outrage. Because in less than a day, Clara would be gone. The next morning dawned with a sky the color of ash, as if the heavens themselves sensed something vile was about to take place. Victor Harland sat in his study, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand though it was barely past sunrise. Papers lay strewn across his mahogany desk, deeds, contracts, numbers scribbled in haste. But at the very center was a single letter. A letter from a stranger who had traveled across the county to Cold Creek with an offer that would change everything. It wasn't money Victor needed, he already had more than any man could spend in a lifetime. It wasn't land, his borders stretched endlessly already. What Victor craved was power, influence beyond his empire of cattle and oil. The man behind the letter promised him exactly that. In return, he asked for Clara. A baby, sold like livestock. The servants didn't know the details, only whispers, a carriage arriving that day, a man in a black coat, a deal struck in shadows. But they felt the tension crawling through the halls. They noticed the nursery door left ajar, Clara's quilt folded too neatly on her crib as if preparing for departure. And they noticed Argent, the white horse, restless in the paddock, ears pinned back, eyes fixed on the mansion. By midday, the carriage appeared. Black as midnight, its wheels grinding against the gravel path. The man who stepped out wore a long coat and gloves despite the warmth, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was owed. Victor greeted him with a firm handshake at the gate. "You brought the papers," he muttered. The man nodded, sliding a sealed envelope into Victor's hand. Their exchange was quiet, but the weight of it carried like a curse. Inside, Clara stirred in the arms of her nanny, a young woman named Mary. She had been hired not long after Clara's birth, and though her position was small, her heart had grown tethered to the child. She sensed something dreadful in Victor's clipped instructions that morning: bring her to the front hall at noon. No questions. Mary pressed Clara closer to her chest as she descended the grand staircase. The baby cooed, tiny fingers clutching at the ribbon of her apron. Each step felt heavier, as if her very soul resisted what was about to happen. When she reached the entryway, Victor was waiting. His eyes, cold and sharp, flicked to Clara. "Give her to me." Mary froze. "Sir, where is she going?" Victor's glare hardened. "That's none of your concern. Do as I say." For a moment, silence held. Then Clara whimpered, a fragile sound that broke Mary's heart. With trembling arms, she surrendered the baby. Victor turned without another word and strode toward the carriage. Argent watched it all from the paddock. His hooves struck the dirt restlessly, his nostrils flaring as the stranger approached the mansion gates. When Victor stepped into the yard with Clara in his arms, Argent let out a piercing whinny, rearing slightly against the fence. The sound rolled across the estate like thunder. Clara squirmed at the noise, her tiny head turning toward the window where she had always seen the horse. Her lips trembled, and for the first time that day, she began to cry. Victor ignored it. He carried her down the steps, his boots grinding gravel, until he stood before the carriage. The stranger extended his arms. "Here," Victor said flatly, handing over his own daughter as though she were nothing more than a parcel. Mary gasped audibly, a hand flying to her mouth. "Sir! Please, she's your child." Victor snapped his gaze back to her. "Not another word. If you value your place in this house, you will forget what you saw." The stranger tucked Clara into the folds of his coat, her wails muffled against the coarse fabric. Without ceremony, he climbed into the carriage and signaled the driver. The horses lurched forward, wheels creaking as the black carriage rolled toward the distant road. Argent's eyes followed every turn of the wheel. He pawed the earth, muscles rippling beneath his white coat, his ears pinned with fury. And then, when the carriage vanished beyond the fence, he threw back his head and let out a wild, broken cry that echoed across the fields. Mary collapsed to her knees in the dirt of the courtyard, sobbing openly. "She's just a baby," she whispered. "How could you?" But Victor had already turned back toward the house, the sealed envelope heavy in his hand. He didn't look back. Not once. The estate felt emptier than it ever had before. But out in the paddock, Argent paced the fence line endlessly, eyes fixed on the distant road. He had seen. He had heard. And he would not forget. That night, when the estate fell silent and Victor drank himself into oblivion, the white horse stood restless beneath the stars. The scent of the carriage still lingered in his memory, the direction it had gone burned into his instincts. He let out a soft snort, stamping once against the earth. A decision had been made. If no one else would fight for the baby, Argent would. And so, before dawn, he broke through the paddock gate. With a fierce whinny, he galloped into the open road, his mane streaming like fire in the moonlight. He would follow the trail of the carriage. He would find the child. And nothing, no darkness, no cruelty, no greed, would stop him. The road stretched endlessly, a ribbon of dust winding through open plains and shadowed canyons. The black carriage rolled steadily forward, its iron wheels rattling like chains across the stones. Inside, Clara cried herself hoarse, her tiny fists pounding weakly against the stranger's coat. He barely looked at her. To him, she was not a child, she was a transaction, a tool for whatever hidden purpose he had bargained with Victor Harland. But they were not alone. Behind them, silent as the night yet fierce as the wind, galloped Argent. His white coat shone under the pale glow of the moon, a beacon moving swiftly across the dark terrain. Every stride was deliberate, powerful, relentless. He had watched the direction the carriage had gone, and now he followed with the unwavering precision of instinct. By dawn, the carriage had left Cold Creek far behind. The driver cracked his whip, urging the weary horses forward, unaware that another set of hooves echoed faintly behind them, always keeping pace. Argent's sides heaved, his breath fogging in the morning chill, but he did not falter. He remembered Clara's cries. He remembered the helpless look in her eyes as she was carried away. That memory drove him harder than any spur. By midday, the carriage pulled into a roadside inn, a grimy place with peeling shutters and the smell of old ale seeping through its walls. The stranger stepped out, cradling Clara, and gave the driver strict instructions before disappearing inside. Argent stopped just beyond the ridge, his body hidden among the scrub brush. He lowered his head, ears flicking, nostrils quivering as he caught the faint scent of the baby. She was there. He knew it. When the stranger entered the inn, Argent crept closer, each step careful despite his size. He reached the edge of the stable yard and peered through the slats of the fence. Clara's faint cries leaked from the upstairs window. The sound made his muscles tremble. One of the inn's stable boys noticed him. "Well now, where'd you come from?" the boy muttered, approaching slowly with a rope in hand. But Argent wasn't there to be caught. With a sudden snort, he reared back, hooves striking the ground so hard the boy stumbled backward in fright. The horse wheeled away, vanishing behind the ridge again, but his eyes never left the inn. That night, while the world slept, Argent kept his vigil. Back at the Harlan estate, Mary sat in her small attic room, sleepless. She couldn't erase the image of Victor handing Clara away. Her heart burned with guilt and anger. She knew she should leave the estate, perhaps even go to the sheriff, but Victor's power stretched deep into the town. People feared him too much. Yet Mary wasn't entirely alone. Through the window, she noticed the broken gate of the paddock, the trail of hoofprints leading away. Argent was gone. For the first time in days, hope stirred in her chest. He's gone after her, she thought, a whisper breaking from her lips. That horse, he might be the only one who can bring her back. The stranger left the inn at dawn, tightening his grip on Clara as though she were luggage instead of life. The carriage jolted forward once again, rumbling down the rocky path that led toward the river crossing. Argent followed from a distance, careful to remain unseen. Each time the carriage slowed, he slowed. Each time it quickened, he surged ahead, his muscles coiled with unyielding strength. He was no ordinary horse, he carried in him an ancient loyalty, a bond not of ownership but of guardianship. By the second day, the driver noticed. He tugged at the reins nervously, glancing over his shoulder. "Sir," he called to the man inside, "there's a white horse. I've seen him more than once. Always behind us." The stranger frowned. Then whipped the horses harder. The driver did as told, but no matter how fast the carriage went, the white stallion was never far behind. On the third evening, storm clouds gathered. The road narrowed as the carriage approached the wooden bridge that spanned the roaring Coldwater River. Rain began to fall, soaking the wood and turning the dirt into treacherous mud. Argent slowed, nostrils flaring as the storm lashed against him. The carriage rumbled onto the bridge, wheels slipping dangerously on the wet planks. The driver cursed under his breath, struggling to steady the team. And then, Clara screamed. Her cry pierced through the rain, raw and desperate. Argent's ears shot forward. The sound ripped through his chest like a spear. With a surge of power, he thundered down the slope toward the bridge. The driver caught sight of him in the storm's flash of lightning. "There! He's here again." The stranger swore under his breath, clutching Clara tighter. "Faster! get across before it reaches us. But fate had other plans. One of the carriage wheels struck a broken plank, snapping under the weight. The carriage lurched violently to one side. The driver shouted, the horses panicked, and in the chaos, the stranger stumbled, nearly losing his grip on Clara. Argent saw it all. His hooves hammered against the sodden earth as he charged closer, mane whipping like fire in the rain. He reached the foot of the bridge just as the carriage tilted dangerously, its wheels caught. The stranger yelled, trying to steady himself, but his boots slipped. Clara wailed louder, arms flailing. In that instant, Argent reared high, his white form illuminated by another crack of lightning. With a furious whinny, he slammed his hooves onto the wooden planks, the sound echoing like gunfire. The driver froze in terror. The stranger's eyes went wide. For a moment, it seemed the entire storm had paused. Argent pawed the wood furiously, blocking the path, his body a wall of defiance between Clara and the abyss below. His eyes blazed with something the stranger couldn't understand, fury, yes, but also unbreakable loyalty. The carriage teetered, then steadied. Clara whimpered, her small face streaked with tears. The stranger tightened his hold and growled, out of my way, beast. But Argent didn't move. He stood his ground, every muscle taut, daring the man to take another step. For the first time since leaving the Harlan estate, the stranger felt unease gnaw at him. The storm eased by midnight, leaving only the soft hiss of rain on the leaves. The carriage managed to limp off the bridge, its wheel cracked but still rolling. The stranger ordered the driver to keep going, though both men kept glancing nervously back at the road behind them. Argent followed still, closer now, his white coat streaked with rain and mud, but his eyes sharper than ever. He would not stop. Not until Clara was safe. As dawn crept over the horizon, Clara stirred against the man's chest, her cries softening into exhausted whimpers. Her tiny hand reached out weakly through the folds of the coat, and for the briefest second, Argent stretched his muzzle forward, almost close enough to touch her. It was a silent promise. I will not leave you. And though the road ahead was still dark, one truth was clear, the horse was no longer just following. He was hunting. Hunting for the moment justice would come. The fourth day of the journey dawned bleak, with a pale sun struggling to break through the storm's aftermath. The road had narrowed into jagged cliffs that overlooked the valley below, and every wheel of the black carriage creaked as though it begged to stop. Inside, Clara whimpered faintly. Exhaustion had drained her tiny body. Her cries, once loud enough to pierce the heavens, had quieted into soft, broken sobs. The stranger glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He shifted her in his arms and muttered, almost there. But Argent was still there too. Always behind. Always watching. The stranger no longer doubted it. Every time he looked back, the white stallion was there, mud-slicked, weary, yet unstoppable. No whip, no storm, no miles of road had broken him. It was unnatural, terrifying even. The driver whispered nervously to himself, that horse, he ain't right. He don't quit. Shut your mouth, the stranger snapped, though his own voice trembled. It's just an animal. That's all it is. But deep down, he knew. This was no ordinary chase. This was judgment riding on four hooves. By midday, they reached a trading post at the edge of the county. It was little more than a cluster of weathered wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a sheriff's office with its single barred window. The stranger ordered the driver to halt. We'll rest here, he said, clutching Clara tightly as he stepped down. The driver, pale and worn, muttered something under his breath but obeyed. What the stranger didn't notice was Argent, standing just beyond the treeline, his mane tossing in the wind. His sharp eyes scanned every movement, every sound. He saw the stranger carry Clara into the saloon, saw the nervous driver glance around, and he stamped his hoof once, a low snort steaming from his nostrils. Inside the saloon, the stranger sat in a corner booth, keeping Clara wrapped tightly in his coat. A few men glanced his way, curious at the sight of a baby in such a place, but no one spoke. Money often silenced questions in towns like this. But one voice did speak, steady, deep, commanding. "Don't believe I've seen you before, stranger." The man looked up. Standing by the bar was Sheriff Alden, a grizzled veteran of the frontier with eyes that had seen too much. He studied the baby in the man's arms and narrowed his gaze. "Traveling with a child, are you?" The stranger forced a smile. "My niece. Her mother passed, and I'm taking her to family." The sheriff didn't answer. He only nodded slowly, though his eyes never left the man. Outside, a sudden commotion broke the air. A sharp whinny cut across the town square. People rushed to the windows. There, standing tall and unyielding in the dust, was Argent. The townsfolk gathered, murmuring among themselves. Children pointed in awe at the gleaming stallion, while adults exchanged uneasy glances. Animals didn't usually wander into town unclaimed, certainly not one so striking, so determined. Sheriff Alden stepped outside, squinting at the sight. "Now whose horse is this?" he called out. The stranger stiffened, clutching Clara tighter. He hissed to the driver, "Keep quiet. Do not say a word." But Argent wasn't there to be ignored. With powerful strides, he marched straight into the square, his hooves striking the cobblestones like a drumbeat. He stopped in front of the saloon, head high, nostrils flared, eyes blazing like twin embers. And then, with deliberate force, he reared up, hooves pawing the air, before slamming them down against the saloon steps. The sound was deafening. Inside, Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. A weak cry escaped her lips. The horse whinnied in response, the sound raw, desperate, and familiar. The sheriff froze. His sharp gaze darted between the baby and the horse. Recognition flickered. "That's Harlan's horse," he muttered under his breath. The saloon went silent. Everyone in Cold Creek knew Victor Harlan's prized white stallion. If the horse was here, if he was chasing this stranger, something was wrong. Sheriff Alden stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "Stranger," he said firmly, "I think you'd better explain why Victor Harlan's horse followed you all the way here. And why that child is crying for him." The man's face blanched. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. Clara began to wail again, louder this time, her little arms straining toward the window where Argent stood. The truth could no longer be contained. While the standoff unfolded in town, back at the estate Mary made her choice. She packed a small satchel, left the mansion behind, and rode into town on an old borrowed mule. She went straight to the sheriff's office, trembling but resolute. When she arrived, she found the square already in chaos. Argent was stamping the ground furiously, the townsfolk murmuring, the sheriff demanding answers from the stranger. "Sheriff!" Mary shouted, breathless. "That baby, Clara, she belongs to Victor Harlan's daughter. He sold her. I saw it myself. Handed her off like she was cattle." The crowd gasped. Murmurs turned to outrage. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He stepped toward the stranger. "Is this true?" The man faltered, his grip on Clara tightening. I was only..." But he never finished. Argent surged forward, planting himself between the sheriff and the stranger, his body a living shield. He pawed the ground, snorting furiously, daring the man to move. The baby reached out again, her cries merging with the horse's cries, the sound tearing through every soul present. The sheriff drew his revolver, not to fire, but to emphasize his command. "Hand over the child. Now." The stranger, cornered and trembling, finally broke. With a curse, he shoved Clara into the sheriff's arms and bolted toward the carriage. But before he could climb aboard, Argent charged. His hooves struck the ground inches from the man's boots, forcing him to stumble back in terror. The crowd erupted, seizing the driver, blocking the stranger's escape. Within moments, the lawman had them both in custody. By evening, the news had reached Victor Harlan. The sheriff himself rode out to the mansion, Clara safe in Mary's arms, Argent standing tall behind them. Victor tried to bluff, to deny, to twist the truth. But the sheriff had witnesses now. The townsfolk had seen the horse's pursuit, Mary had spoken, and the stranger had confessed under pressure. Victor Harland, the untouchable billionaire of Cold Creek, was exposed as a man who sold his own flesh and blood. The law would deal with him. The people would never forgive him. That night in town, Clara lay nestled in Mary's arms, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep for the first time in days. The townsfolk gathered in quiet awe, watching as Argent stood close, lowering his massive head until his muzzle brushed the edge of Clara's quilt. Mary smiled through tears. "He never gave up on her," she whispered. "Not once." The sheriff nodded. "No, ma'am. Sometimes justice don't come from men. Sometimes it comes from loyalty, and a horse that refuses to forget." Argent let out a soft whicker, his eyes closing as Clara's tiny hand found his mane. The bond, undeniable and unbreakable, glowed in that silent moment. But though peace had settled for now, the story was not yet done. Justice had been revealed, but its price, and its lessons, were still to come. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. Cold Creek, once a quiet town where secrets stayed buried, now hummed with the sound of truth finally breaking free. For years, Victor Harlan had walked untouchable, cloaked in wealth and fear. But the betrayal of his own blood was too monstrous to be ignored. The sheriff gathered statements, secured evidence, and placed Victor under arrest. When the iron cuffs clamped around his wrists, the great billionaire didn't roar with defiance or spit with anger, he hung his head in silence, as if the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. The carriage of lawmen rolled him through the town square, and for the first time, people did not lower their heads in fear. They stared openly. Some spat on the dirt after his passing. Others muttered prayers for Clara. And standing tall by the courthouse steps was Argent, the white stallion, his mane glistening in the sunlight like spun silver. He had become a living symbol of truth. Children pointed in awe, mothers pressed their hands to their hearts, and the townsfolk began to whisper his name like he was something more than a horse, he was loyalty itself made flesh. Mary took Clara into her care. Though she was young and had little in the way of possessions, her heart was richer than any mansion. She rocked Clara through the nights, soothed her tears with lullabies, and fed her with milk she bought from neighbors who had begun to pitch in. The town rallied around them. Bread, quilts, toys carved from wood, all gifts left quietly at Mary's doorstep. One afternoon, as Mary sat on the porch with Clara asleep against her chest, she heard a familiar sound, the steady rhythm of hooves. Argent appeared at the gate, his eyes searching until they found the child. With a soft whinny, he lowered his head, almost bowing. Mary rose, her eyes wet. "You found her once. You protected her. You'll always have a place with us." From that day on, Argent was no longer just Harlan's horse. He became Clara's guardian, Mary's companion, and the town's pride. He would graze freely in the fields, but no matter how far he wandered, he always returned to rest outside the little home where Clara slept. The trial was swift and merciless. Testimonies poured in, Mary's account of what she witnessed, the stranger's confession of the deal, and the undeniable fact that Argent had tracked the carriage across counties, leading the sheriff directly to Clara. Victor tried once, in a hoarse voice, to defend himself. "I was doing what was best. I needed power, for her future." The judge silenced him. No future can be built on betrayal. A father's duty is to protect, not to profit. The gavel struck, and with it, the last of Victor Harlan's empire crumbled. His land, his wealth, his reputation, all stripped away. What remained was a broken man, a name spat out with disgust, a cautionary tale for generations to come. Weeks later, the town gathered in the square for something rare, a celebration, not of wealth or status, but of loyalty. A wooden plaque was unveiled at the paddock gate, etched with the words, "To Argent, the white stallion, protector of the innocent, witness of truth." The townsfolk cheered, their voices echoing through the valley. Children ran to touch Argent's mane, while Clara, now healthier and stronger, giggled in Mary's arms. She reached out toward the horse, and Argent lowered his great head, letting her tiny fingers curl into his mane. Mary smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. You see, Clara, not all family is by blood. Some family finds us in the moments we need them most. The sheriff nodded, his weathered face softening. And sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it has hooves and a mane. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Argent stood with Clara nestled against his side. Mary watched as the child giggled, her laughter mingling with the gentle snorts of the horse. It was a scene no money could buy, no empire could forge, a baby safe, a horse faithful, a town united in compassion. Argent lifted his head, gazing toward the horizon where the road stretched into forever. Perhaps he remembered the chase, the storms, the bridges, the miles he had conquered to bring truth to light. Perhaps he knew his work was not just in saving Clara, but in reminding all who saw him what loyalty truly meant. He let out one final whinny that evening, strong and clear, echoing across the fields. It was not the cry of battle, nor the call of pursuit. It was the song of peace, of promise, of justice fulfilled. Years later, Clara would grow to hear the story of how a horse saved her life when men failed her. She would carry it not as a wound, but as a lesson, that love and loyalty can rise from the most unexpected places, and that even in the darkest betrayal, truth will find a way to shine. For Cold Creek never forgot. And neither did Argent. Because sometimes, the purest courage comes not from power, nor from wealth, but from a loyal heart that refuses to turn away.